Okay, good evening everybody. I'm Richard Screeton, I'm Deputy Director for Alumni Engagement here at the University of Manchester, and it's great to see so many of you here this evening. Tonight's event is part of our varied events programme through which we aim to bring back staff, students, alumni and supporters back to campus to hear about our outstanding ideas and research and to inspire lifelong learning. Before we get started this evening, I've got a couple of housekeeping announcements. If you could all ensure that your phones are turned to silent. And we're not expecting a fire alarm this evening, so if the alarms do sound, please make your way outside of the building and follow instructions from a member of staff. So to this evening's event, which we're grateful to be delivering in partnership with Civic Future. Civic Future supports highly talented young leaders to understand the moral, technological and governance challenges of our time. And our chair this evening is Anaya Follerinman. Anaya is journalist and head of events and engagement at Civic Future. And she's joined by a panel of speakers who will be talking about tonight's theme of artificial intelligence. So I'll let Anaya tell you a bit about the work of Civic Futures and chair tonight's event.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming to tonight's event, and thank you to the University of Manchester for partnering with us at Civic Future. So as was said, my name is Anaya. I'm Head of Events and Engagement at Civic Future, and I'll just give a little bit, not too long, background about the organisation. We were founded last year, so it's just a month, I think, after our one-year anniversary. Founded by Munira Mirza, who's sitting at the front here, former Head of Policy at Number 10. And there's a drinks reception afterwards, so please stay and have a chat with some members of the team to find out more about the organisation. But it was founded in part because of a feeling that there was a narrowing of the kinds of people that were going into public life, and also many of the big challenges that we're facing as a society, whether that was economic stagnation, demographic shifts, to the geopolitical challenges that we see today. Many of those big questions, it often feels, or there's an increasing sense in the public that the people that we have in power are often not able to rise to those challenges. And what is the reason for that? Whether that's questions around leadership, bureaucratic challenges. And so we have several different strands of the organisation. Our flagship programme is the fellowship, and it essentially trains early to mid-career professionals to have in the governance, philosophical, moral and technological challenges that we face as a society, equipping them with the tools to navigate governance today. And we also have an annual conference which brings together experts and decision makers around a big question. One of them that we had was in July, just recently, on economic stagnation. And we have other ways in which we attempt to raise the public debate and also have discussions like this on big questions that we're facing today, like artificial intelligence. So obviously we've brought together a fantastic panel, which I'm very much looking forward to introducing. Right next to me here, we have Tamandra Harkness. She is a statistician, a broadcaster, and also a comedian. She writes regularly on many of the topics that we're going to discuss today. And her forthcoming book with HarperCollins will explore the changing relationship between human identity and technology, and I'm sure she'll be bringing in some of the themes that she'll be exploring in the book in the discussion. We also have Saffron Hang, who is a technologist, researcher, and writer. She is the co-director of the Collective Intelligence Project, which is a research and policy organisation that seeks to improve and leverage humanity's collective intelligence. So looking forward to hearing your thoughts. We also have Tamara Hack, who is a lead data scientist at Jaguar Land Rover, using the connected car and AI to provide the best products and experiences for her customers. And we also have Professor Caroline Jay, who is a professor of computer science and head of research in the School of Engineering. So first, we'll just give a round of applause to our panel. And just before we get started, if you just see just in the corner there, there is a Slido. If you type in Slido and then you can enter the number, and that's another way to submit questions if you have any, if you don't necessarily want to put your hand up and ask them. So we'll take questions at the end. So firstly, we'll take you to Mandra.
Thank you very much. So I was asked am I optimistic or pessimistic about AI? And a bit of both, I think. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with 3 reasons why I am, in the short to medium term, pessimistic. And if I have time, I'll come on and say why in the medium to long term I'm optimistic. But if I don't have time, maybe we can come back to it at some later point in the discussion. So I think the immediate reason why I'm a bit doubtful about the immediate future of AI is, ironically, the massive success of ChatGPT and similar projects, the large language models. I'm not sure how technical should I get here. Okay, so who in the room has heard the phrase large language model before? Okay, so you're quite a techie crowd. Okay, that's fine. If at any point I start, I mean, the other people are much more technical than me, but if I start saying something that's too technical for you, look really confused, and then I'll back up a little bit. But I think you're probably ahead of me in a lot of this. Okay, so ChatGPT, which burst on the scene almost exactly a year ago, in fact, brought the idea of large language models, machine learning, and AI generally to a much wider audience than ever before. And lots of people to whom AI was just a phrase. I'm actually now remembering when I gave a talk about my first book, which is called Big Data, Does Size Matter? At Harrogate Book Festival, I was talking about AI, and at the end my uncle, who was there, came over and said, I was really confused then, because to me AI means artificial insemination. So I think we're a long way past that stage. I think a lot of people now very familiar with the idea of AI have experimented with using it, think that AI is ChatGPT and similar things, where you can ask it a question in a human-like way and it will answer in a human-like way. And sometimes the answers will be plausible. Well, actually, they'll probably be plausible. Sometimes they'll also be right. And I'm a bit worried that as people inevitably discover the limitations of that, e.g. the lawyer in New York who asked ChatGPT, thinking it was just a search engine, asked it to give him relevant previous cases for a case he was going to represent someone in court. And asked ChatGPT, are these real cases? And ChatGPT said, yes, I'll give you the citations. Here you are. Spoiler, they were not real cases. He was fined $5,000. So as this kind of disillusionment, I think, creeps in and people realise that it's not an all-knowing, sentient, artificial being, but a really, really good predictive text program, then I'm worried that the disillusionment will bleed across to other kinds of AI, which have been quietly coming on and becoming really quite good over the last few decades, and that actually show a lot of promise to do very well the things that AI is good at. So I'm worried that there will be a disillusionment and other kinds of AI will suffer as a result. There's also a couple of other reasons why I'm a little pessimistic in the short to medium term. One of them is that AI is mostly being developed by a handful of very large companies and headed by a handful of people of quite similar backgrounds. Most of them went to Stanford. Most of them have got limited life experience compared to, for example, just looking out at the range of people in this room and on this panel, I suspect that we between us have a lot more range of life experience than the people heading the companies that are doing the AI, and that the companies themselves inevitably have a very large concentration of wealth and of data, and the two things often go together, and so that gives them incentives to use AI in certain ways and not in other ways. And then, of course, the other big source of money and power going into AI is governments, who again have incentives to use AI in certain ways and not others. And the third thing that makes me pessimistic is that people talk about in the past there were industrial revolutions, but it was fine because we got new jobs. You know, the internal combustion engine came along, people working with horses had to retrain, but that was fine because then we had the car industry, and then we also had the aviation industry, which employs like 1 million people worldwide. The difference now, I mean, speaking of the previous conference that you ran, that I came to, called The Great Stagnation, the difference is we do not have a lot of economic growth going on. You know, we're at the point where horses were replaced by the internal combustion engine. economies were booming, they were growing really fast. There was a real appetite to invest in new industries and new technologies. And I don't see that now. If anything, I think there's a worrying ambivalence towards even the aspiration to economic growth. So I think I will stop there, and then I'll come back to my reasons for optimism later on, when perhaps we need something to cheer us all up a bit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi. Okay, so maybe then I will delve into some of the more optimistic side of things. So a little bit of background, I think, on me. I used to be a research engineer at DeepMind and have kind of worked on a bunch of projects from large language models to multi-agent RL to human AI interaction. So I've been interested in the intersection of machine learning and society for a while. And I left last year and started a nonprofit called the Collective Intelligence Project, which works on how we can have better kind of and more collective governance structures over the kind of leading edge of our transformative technologies. I think recognizing that technology is a really powerful driver of change in society, but so few people have any input or kind of, we have very little ability to collectively set the direction of this very powerful force of change. So can we create ways and pilot ways of doing that? Talk a little bit about that today, but I think I feel similarly in this sort of like sort of short-term pessimistic, long-term optimistic. I think that some of the reasons that I'm pessimistic are very similar. This sense of so few people developing it, the privatization of, also because a lot of my experiences in things like large language models, I'll talk a lot about that today and not about like other more narrow and more known forms of AI. But basically, things like generative AI or large language models privatize a lot of the commons of the data that, the entirety of humanity has contributed to in some way, but it's not currently set up in terms of how it's governed to actually return that benefit back to the people who have contributed. I think there's lots of details to debate here, like, if Facebook open sources these models, does that count? But I think largely that problem isn't really being addressed. I think that another reason for more pessimism is that at the moment we really don't understand these models. Like the ways in which machine learning researchers evaluate these general purpose models are wholly inadequate to actually understand how they behave when deployed in the real world and when actual users interact with them. So everybody is kind of, like the world is sort of a test bed right now, and that is happening at scale because ChatGPT was the fastest growing consumer product in history. So that's a little concerning. We actually don't have good methods as scientists of understanding how these models are behaving. On the more optimistic side, so I think, so at the beginning of this year, I started working a lot more on collective input into various parts of the AI deployment process, thinking about, okay, how do we actually have more and different types of people have a say over the future of these technologies. That coincided very interestingly with the release of ChatGPT. And what me and my co-founder ended up doing was basically running a bunch of little pilots on democratic input into AI and seeing what people were saying and seeing if that could be fed into decisions that actual AI developers and deployers were making, and seeing if we can join that up. So can we join up public voice and to actual deployment? And we, after running a couple of these experiments, we flew to San Francisco, set up meetings with OpenAI, with Anthropic, with a bunch of kind of AI companies. And we were like, hey, we think that democratic input is really important. We are willing to partner with you on projects, like here are projects that we're excited about to make this happen. So one of these projects was a sort of what we called a participatory risk prioritization exercise, where we had input from 1,000 Americans on what risks and harms of AI they were most worried about through a sort of like bottom-up, large-scale digital process. And then we invited some of those people to an online roundtable with OpenAI employees to discuss the results. And the results are really interesting because I think one of the top takeaways was that people are really worried about over-reliance on a technology that they don't understand. And the kind of lived experience of some of these people who had like used ChatGPT extensively in their daily life was super interesting. Like there was a university student who was talking about him trying to figure out how to not just rely on ChatGPT to do all of his homework for him, and like how do you actually use it as a tutor? And this like quite subtle question of over-reliance that he faced there. And there are also more existential questions about, what does it mean to kind of like give birth to a new intelligence? But overall, I think another takeaway was that people had really nuanced input, and they were also really excited about being engaged. Like we had someone who was saying, I'm so glad I learned all these things about what happens in the room, at these companies today, but I've learned a lot more about how these tools actually work and how my understanding of how they worked was wrong, but I wish I didn't have to come into the room to like learn this. Why are there not more things on, these companies' websites? Like, why are you not telling us more? So I think running more process like that feels really promising. Sorry, I'm speaking a lot. I think one other thing I'll speak to is our work with Anthropic, which is about actually fine-tuning one of their models on the collective input of 1,000 people. And we asked those people, what principles do you want your chatbots to follow? And they provided input. So they said, I want AI to not be sexist, or, I want it to care about being kind, or I want it to not say things unless it's provably verifiable, like whatever. And we had thousands of these comments, and we actually whittled them down and turned them into a constitution. That's what Anthropic calls it. And trained the model on it, and it actually ended up being as performant as their normal model, for which the behavioral principles were picked by just a couple of engineers in a room. So it was equally performant, and it was less biased on this bias benchmark that we used. So that was quite cool. And we're kind of helping with instigating more of these processes in Taiwan and elsewhere. So I'm optimistic about this revival of kind of participatory AI and democratic input, and I like to think that we've been playing some role in that, and kind of doing work going forward on linking more of the public sector and democratic space with the AI space, because these really general purpose technologies that are being deployed very widely badly need more of that. Another thing I'm optimistic about is I'm currently doing some contracting work with the UK AI Safety Institute, which is this new initiative that was started this year with £100 million, working on kind of advancing the frontier of evaluating AI models, which I said was at a really bad state. So I'm really optimistic about resources going into that, because I think that that's a really underappreciated problem. And I'm personally working on kind of evaluation of societal impacts and harms, which I can talk about more. But yeah, really optimistic about more kind of democratic input and better evaluations in the hopefully soon to be future. I can't English, but yeah.
Thank you, Safa. And Tamana?
Yeah. Hi everyone, a little bit different. I've got some slides today. Thanks so much for your time this evening to allow me to give you my take on this. I'm a lead data scientist at Jaguar Land Rover, and I use data from the connected car to improve our luxurious vehicles and our customer experiences through the use of AI and ML. Apologies, some of the themes which I'll talk about have already been covered, but I'm just going to go through them anyway. And I would be really delighted to bring my industry and personal perspective into AI for good and its considerations and risks in context of wider society and also the future of the car. Cool. So I think some of this has been covered already, but I'm just going to go through it anyway. But it's really hard to ignore that AI has reached a new level of hype and attention. It's everything, everywhere, all at once. I literally picked that quote from a film this year. A larger proportion of people are now AI aware and literate to the extent that I don't need to explain what AI means, which is quite refreshing because I used to have to do that all the time. Recent OpenAI developments and tools such as DALL-E and ChatGPT have brought AI to the surface for the public to access easily, and in most cases all you have to do is sign up and it's at your fingertips. So these popular tools employ generative AI, and I know it's already been discussed, but I still want to explain it in my talk. And it's different from traditional AI in the sense that these tools can and are thinking on their own in a sense, and I'll explain why as well. So recent advancements in these tools means that they've got more and more data underpinning them, and also random elements which allow them to have a little bit of creativity. And that is what turns traditional AI into generative AI. And also, the content which is created, whether that's conversations, images, or more, are more convincing now and high quality to be useful. So when I've looked at ChatGPT myself and I've put in some prompts, I have seen some dubious output, but I think with time it's getting a little bit better. And I've seen some videos online of people with 6 fingers and, you know, really random stuff, but I do think over time some of that content is going to be more quality and more useful. So basically, it's not just tasks which follow rules and processes which can be taught to a system anymore. Machines can and are thinking on their own, as I said. And that creates impact on creative tasks as well as the real-based ones. The word that describes all of this, as someone who works in AI, is dystopian. So, you know, I can imagine how someone who does not work in AI felt about shifts this year. I'm just moving on now. So that is a winding road. And I'll just talk to you about some of the risks and opportunities to society. So what's the impact of rapidly advancing AI to real life and to our people and way of life as well? So there's ups and downs when you look at this. Apologies. So some of the risks I'll take you through. Privacy is a really big one. There's a lack of AI regulation, both at a national and international level. People are concerned about how their data is collected and used. And I know people who I interact with day to day, we've got varying different opinions on privacy, and we all work in AI, so it's not just people who don't work in AI, you know, people who are surrounded by it also have the privacy concerns. Another big area is bias, and there's so many different types of bias, society-related, data bias, and also knowledge cut-offs as well in some of the really popular tools. I won't mention the name, but you could probably guess which tool I'm talking about. It just means that the information underpinning the AI system is out of date to a point, and that can lead to bias in some of the outputs. Also, I learned this word for the first time recently. Hallucinations are not in the not in the normal sense, but that's where false information is given to you convincingly, and I think that's quite dangerous for obvious reasons. Legal responsibility. So who is to blame if an AI system goes wrong or rogue? Did anyone watch Mission Impossible 7? They might have took it to an extreme for entertainment purposes, but they described an AI as the enemy, as a self-learning, truth-eating digital parasite. So I thought that film was incredible in the fact it was so timely. It takes years to make some of these really big blockbuster films, and threw everything in there, AI, crypto, you name it. It's really cool. The main point that I want to discuss on this slide is the digital divide. So some people say that AI development will worsen socio-economic inequalities, creating divide between people who embrace and adopt AI with those who have limited access or who might be replaced by AI. And policymakers really need to improve efforts to narrow the gap between those different groups of people, both at a national level but also at an international level as well. And I do fear for those groups who might be left behind. So all of that sounded really pessimistic, but by and large, I am really optimistic. And I think I'm in a privileged position to feel that way, and I just want to acknowledge that as well. I think that there's widespread opportunity from AI across various industries. But let me take you into my world. This is the future of the car, thanks to AI. So yeah, this is the inside of a Jaguar F-Type. And the connected car is what I work with day to day. It's my bread and butter. And I just want to explain what a connected car is. So a lot of cars these days are connected. And that means that they've got internet access and can interact with other devices connected to the internet, if the customer opts in. I have to say that for GDPR reasons. So the connected car is a precursor to the software-defined car. And that just means that a car has software that can update, like your mobile phones. So whenever I have new starters in my team and I'm trying to explain what the connected car is, I literally just tell them, just think of it like a mobile phone. It can update, and it's not just a device, it's not even a smart device, it's intelligent. And with the car, it is not just simply that gets you from A to B, it's intelligent, just like your mobile phone. And it will continuously update if you want it to, and be relevant and desirable for a lot longer. So I think the days of people keeping their car for 3 years and then getting a new one is going to change. Because of software, I do think we'll see people who keep their vehicle for a lot longer, even up to 10 years, because the software will make it feel like it's newer. So with this, we've got a clear avenue to use AI to dramatically improve the user experience with our cars, from a nice-to-have sense, such as personalization of digital features, to more time and safety-critical features as well. So yeah, that's me and Kano. So some of the rapid progress that AI is making to redefine what the car means. So safety, this is a big one. I don't want my car to just get me from A to B. I want it to look after me, warn me if something has been detected in the road ahead, and not just warn me, adapt as well. If my attention is waning, or if I've been compromised, if someone's trying to steal my Range Rover, help me get me to my destination safely as my travel companion, not just as a vehicle. It was looking after me and for the safety of others around me as well. Time as well. I don't know about you, but I feel like I've lost so much time as I've been getting older, thanks to the job and getting married and things like that. So time is more precious to me, and I'm looking for convenience. So I want my car to get me to my destination without costing me any time at all. And considering that my car is more likely to be an EV in the future, can you tell me which routes to take? Can you account for live traffic conditions? Can you also account for charge points on the way as well, and the availability of them as well? As consumers and policymakers are shifting to a more EV future, AI can be used effectively to mitigate range anxiety and upkeep the customer journey, even improve it. And lastly, personalisation. I want to be recognised as an individual, and I want my own needs and wants to be recognised as well, to give me a seamless experience with my car, even if I share it with someone else. So me and my husband, we share our vehicles, and I want my car to know that I'm driving it, and I want it to suit my needs, not his. And my preferences can relate to both physical settings in the car. I'm a lot shorter than him, he's a lot taller, and also my digital needs as well, such as in entertainment, climate, all of that as well. So the car will be playing a much different role in our lives than what we've been used to. And finally, so just to wrap up then, our work and in life, I feel really optimistic about how AI can and is changing the landscape. And that's a defender in the desert. We should be allowed to innovate and continue with our development in this space. But I do think I'm in a privileged position to say that, and I know that I am, because I work in AI and tech, and even AI aside, I've got access to digital infrastructure, I've got a laptop, I've got Wi-Fi, and like with other advancements, the acceleration of the curation and adoption of AI needs to come in tandem with the rapid development and the following support pillars. So education and upskilling, and I mentioned this point, digital infrastructure and literacy and access to these, and that is literally Wi-Fi and also equipment as well. Regulations which focus on AI, not just data. I think there's a lot of regulation on data, GDPR again, but we need some on AI as well. Better detection of misuse. I've seen some incredible misuse on Instagram lately, and yeah, it's just quite dangerous because I'm aware of misuse and a lot of people are not. And an increased focus on bias during the curation of AI products, which is why I'm a big champion for women working in AI as well, as we've been discussing. And if policymakers and tech leaders increase efforts here, they'll bring more of us on this journey in a responsible way and allow more of us to feel optimistic. Thanks so much for listening.
Right, okay, so I'm a human-computer interaction researcher. And what that means is I'm interested in understanding the relationship between people and technology so that we can improve the way that we design it. So of course, as part of my job, I spend an awful lot of time looking at other people using technology, studying what other people do. And in fact, I wanted to start this evening by just reflecting briefly on an experience I had of taking part in the study, where I was on what I'll call the receiving end of AI, because actually that experience has affected me really significantly in terms of how I think about this field. So, as well as doing research at the university, I teach a course called Robot Overlords. So I don't know whether, we have some students in this evening, I don't know whether there's anyone who does Robot Overlords. I'll just put a quick plug for next semester. It's open to anyone, any second-year student in the university. So it could be a computer scientist who studies it, but we also have historians and geographers and medics, so people from all sorts of different disciplines. And the idea of this course is to equip our students with an understanding of AI so they feel confident working with it in the future. So we want to give them a bit of practical experience, so everyone does a bit of programming. You know, people were sceptical about whether that was going to go down well, but you know, it seems to work. People do a bit of programming. We have lots of discussions. We debate the pros and cons, and we look at lots of examples of how it is being used in the workplace. And the aim of this is sort of twofold. So the first thing is, you know, this is coming. It's already here in a lot of respects. So we want our students to be, you know, in a position where they are firstly able to deal with it and feel confident dealing with it. And I was thinking about what Taman was saying about the digital divide. So most of the people in this room are on what I'm going to call the right side of the digital divide. You know, we're here having this discussion, but actually, you know, it's a major issue. And so this is one of the things that we're really focused on. And then the second thing is also, and this relates to what Saffron was saying, you know, we want people to also feel that they're stakeholders, to feel empowered to have those conversations, to be able to feed into this process. So as, some kind of new tool is brought into your workplace, do you understand how it works? Do you feel you're able to comment on it? How does it fit in with the processes? Is it actually, key to the way that you want to work? So it's to give them that kind of experience as well. Anyway, turns out that if you teach on a course that discusses things like people being replaced by AI in the workplace, you have to be open to being replaced yourself. And so the study that I took part in was looking at using AI for marking essays. So what happens in this course is towards the end of it, students will submit an essay and it'll be about a topic that's important to them. So they do a SWOT analysis, they look at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats of a particular area of AI in the workplace. So they could be looking at AI in paediatric medicine, or they could be looking at using AI in sporting events, this kind of thing, right? And so they submit this essay, and then normally what happens is I receive the essay and then I mark it. And this time what happened was it went to an AI tool. Now, I don't know which tool it was. I wasn't told anything about this. I was in a controlled study. But anyway, it went to this tool, and I believe it was based on a large language model. And it provided a mark, right? So it marked it out of 50, and then it gave feedback too. So it gave feedback along the lines of, here's what you did well, here's what you could have done better. Sometimes quite a lot of words, right? Quite a lot of feedback. And my job was to evaluate it. So we didn't just give the marks back to the students, I marked it as well. So we were careful about that for good reason, it turns out. But I was sort of had to look at this feedback and then determine whether it was working or not. And my experience was really interesting. So within about 2 essays, I realised a couple of things. So the first one was, at present, it's important to say that, this tool was just not going to work for me at all, right? And the reason for this was, firstly, it made mistakes. And so most of the time it might say some plausible stuff, right? So it made mistakes. One mistake, anyone who's done a degree or handed an essay knows that they do not want to lose marks because of a tool making a mistake. It's bad enough when lecturers do it, but if it's an AI doing it, I don't know, is that worse? I'm not sure. For discussion. So that was one issue, and it didn't really sound like me either. It didn't give the kind of feedback that I thought was useful. Okay, come back to that. So going back to Samandra's point actually about how we don't want the fact that these tools are currently making mistakes to hold us back. I totally accept that. And actually, what we could do with this tool is we can train it better. Okay, it will get more accurate over time. We could probably train it to sound more like me. I don't know whether I'd be able to produce enough training data to make that happen, but this is an option. Fine. So we can probably address those issues. But the main problem for me, and this is the second issue, was that essay was written by a person to communicate an idea, an argument, to another person. And the minute you take the person reading it away, there's no point in having the essay. And so if you take it a step further, and the students are now using ChatGPT to write their essays, I'm not going to say it never happens. So they're pressing a button to write their essays, essentially, and I'm pressing a button to mark it, and we can automate the button pressing. Anyway, you take it to its logical conclusion, and you might as well not have an essay, right? They cancel each other out. So we can save a lot of energy that way. And perhaps that's a good thing. Anyway, so I thought, and that was really, really interesting for me. And it was taking part in that study. I was like, oh yeah, this is obvious when you think about it. But actually, because I spend all my time, I work in technology, right? I spend all my time in the hype and, academics. So like to be a bit skeptical of it, like to think of myself as someone who critically analyses. But you don't always do that, right? It's easy to get sucked in. And so that was really interesting for me. So where does it leave us? Okay, well, it's really interesting the way we think about this. So when we think about whether we're optimistic or pessimistic and when we think about how we deal with these issues moving forward, and I think all my fellow panellists have already made this point really well, actually. This is not really about technology, this issue, okay? These issues are about humanity. They're about how we as people want to live. It's, the important, humanity is about human connection, right? It's about being with other people. And so, if we're in this situation where, and I think the rhetoric is a little bit like this at the moment, oh, well, machines are going to replace us in literally everything. It's like, well, yeah, but something doesn't feel quite right about that. It's kind of missing the point, I think, in some ways. So I am very optimistic about many aspects of AI, okay? It allows us to scale up the things we can do with data. It's been tremendously successful in many aspects of healthcare. We're seeing it do really fantastic things. I'm very pleased to hear that my car is going to feel new for 10 years. I'm very excited about that. So I think there are lots of problems as well, some of which we've touched on. And I think as long as we remember that thinking about the way we want to live as humans is the most important thing, I'm optimistic that AI will help to improve our lives. Yeah, I think we'll leave it there.
So we're now going to just have a chat discussion before we go to the Q&A, but just a reminder, feel free to use Slido if you want to submit questions, and also in the course of this chat discussion, think of questions, as we'd love to hear your thoughts and responses to what the panel has said. So I'll start with you, Timandra. So you said that you were somewhat concerned about people maybe having these great expectations, and then because of the mistakes, that goes down a little bit. Because of the issues that are still being worked out in relation to AI. But do you believe the hype around it, that it is this transformative technology that's going to fundamentally change everything, and society's rapidly moving forward at this pace, and we just don't even know what hits us? Do you believe that? Do you accept that?
Yeah, I do think it's a transformative technology, and I think the people that make the analogies with previous ages where physical tasks were automated are really onto something. So, some of my ancestors worked in the docks, and their job was to physically go in the holds of ships and physically carry stuff out. And that obviously wouldn't happen now, because it arrives in a container and one person moves it with a crane, and it's really efficient, and that's really good. That's a really good thing. Nobody should be in the holds of ships moving things. And I think it will do the same for mental tasks that are really routine, and it's doing that already. I don't muck about with ChatGPT, and I probably should, because I could have a lot of fun with it, but what I do is use transcription software, which has changed my working life, absolutely changed. I used to have to, and I'm not really a touch typist, when I did interviews I would have to sit and listen and type it out, and now a machine transcribes it, and it's not perfect, but it's good enough that I can then use that for editing. And it's really made me massively more productive. So I think there are lots of examples like that where AI can make us more productive, can help us do the same things faster. But I also think there's things that AI does that we can't do. And this, I suppose, is the field of me being optimistic. But one of the things that worries me about the whole large language model thing is that it's good at a certain type of thing. It's generative. As people have said, it generates things with certain quirks and qualities. But there are other kinds of AI that are already doing amazing things, that are really good at pattern finding and finding what things have in common with each other. And that's what underlies things like being able to look at medical scans and say, oh, well, actually, these scans are unlike these scans in ways that no human could spot, because there is a limit to how much data we can take in and process. In the real world, we're really good at drawing inferences from ridiculous amounts of all kinds of data. That's when you hear people talk about intuition, that's basically what we're doing. We're processing massive amounts of sensory data and calling on our memories and finding patterns and drawing inferences. But if you give us data like brain scans, there's just a limit to how much we can look at 1 million brain scans and go, oh, these ones are different, and that's why a doctor should see this person. So AI is brilliant at that kind of thing, and at really quickly automating routine data sorting tasks. So my worry is partly that people who weren't really aware of AI before will come across ChatGPT and go, oh, this is magic. It's sentient. It's almost like a human. Oh, no, hang on. It's just randomly making stuff up. If it is a human, it's an impro troupe without a fact checker. And I don't want to entrust my important life to that. And they will actually be disillusioned about stuff that is already really good at other important tasks. So that's my main worry. I mean, I think the generative stuff is fun, but there are certain limitations it's always going to have. And, you know, you three, I think, know far more about the details of why that is than I do. But it's designed to predict the most probable thing that comes next. And in some of the advanced generative programs, then another program comes along and goes, well, that's clearly wrong, and it keeps, there's a kind of trial and error of becoming more convincing. But that's what it's designed to do. It's not actually designed to be able to reason in a human-like way. But then there are other kinds of AI that, you know, in a narrow sense, can reason in a human-like way, in a very narrow, limited way. So that I think is my worry, that actually people for whom ChatGPT is their first actual interaction with AI are going to think that's what AI is, and then realise what it can't do and think, oh, well, that was a rip-off, wasn't it? It was a dead loss. When actually, there's lots of stuff it could be doing, but isn't, because, you know, the companies are not necessarily putting the energy into that for, you know, the reasons we discussed before.
And Saffron, I mean, you mentioned the democratic point. I mean, how do we make AI more democratic? I mean, it's because I think that people were teaching coding in schools at one point, and I think that is still happening. I mean, is it something that can be taught? I mean, a lot of the heads of the AI companies are relatively young. So it does seem like something that perhaps a younger generation can pick up more easily. And we also had the AI Safety Summit. I mean, what are the ways now that we should be doing to get more people to be democratically participating?
Yeah, I think my answer is going to be, like, the high level answer is there's lots of different ways. But I think there's lots of things that people mean when they say democratizing AI. They can mean, one of my kind of research collaborators has this great paper on, you know, there's usually 4 things that people mean. Well, one of 4 things they mean when they say democratizing AI could be democratizing the use, democratizing development, democratizing governance, and then democratizing governance is the last one. I forgot the second to last one, but there's 4 things, and I think there's lots of different strategies for all of them. I think that what I'm really interested in is in democratizing governance, because I think that's quite fundamental and has a lot of downstream consequences on people's, you know, ability to be empowered when it comes to technology. I also, by the way, really agree with Caroline's point on, you know, this is really about people and how we want to live, and technology is secondary to that. And so if we want to be empowered over our own lives, you know, I think democratizing governance is important. One thing I will say about kind of participation in, you know, coding and in being part of this, I actually do, I forgot to say this, but I do really think there's so much that people can do in terms of, like students, like a lot of you can do in terms of advancing the frontier of science in large language models, because a lot of these models are open sourced now, and you know, there are barriers in terms of compute, but the models will get smaller, they'll get easier to run. And in terms of what I was saying about, we don't know how to evaluate these models. Like, we don't really understand how to measure the ways in which they behave. And that is the kind of science that is actually relatively accessible to people who can just download one of these models, run them themselves, try and come up with metrics, fine-tune them on various things. Like, I think, you know, we want to understand how they perform in lots of different contexts. We want different domain experts to be inputting on, you know, does it actually behave is it actually as performant as, say, a lawyer? Or is it actually, does it actually have the right knowledge when it comes to medicine? So there's some people that I know who did some work on how actually ChatGPT outputs a lot of kind of race-based medicine, and that requires people going and interacting with the model and saying, like people with domain expertise, like doctors, interacting with the models and being like, wait, this is, it's saying the stuff which is wrong, and that the engineers wouldn't have known because they don't have medical expertise. So there's a lot of ways in which people really do need to participate in this, and can. You know, you can create a data set of, you know, this is what correct medical answers look like, and then give them to the engineers and they can run that. Or we can try and come up with, you know, cooperative structures around which we govern and kind of pay people for participating in this. I think there's a lot of space here to explore in a lot of different avenues.
Tamana, you mentioned that you think that there should be more regulation in this area, but some people, you know, essentially argue that they're worried that regulation is going to come in way too early when we're just at the start of this, and preemptive legislation could prevent innovation, for example. I mean, so what do you think in this area? What regulation do you think is needed, and what's your response to those that are concerned about regulation coming in too soon or at all?
I think the concerns are valid, and I'm going to think about the car again. So if we think about autonomous driving, the capability is there. So there's different levels of autonomy with a vehicle, and in terms of regulation, it's different for different markets in terms of how far you can go legally. And I think in the UK, we're on level 2. Now, the regulation, I don't think in this case has come too early, because there's so many safety concerns with autonomous vehicles, as well as safety benefits. So what I'd say to people who think it's coming in too early, I personally don't think so. I think there is a need for some regulation. And like I said in my talk, some of the things I've seen more generally, even on social media, especially in the wake of some of the horrible things that are happening in the world right now, some of the misuse of AI has been deeply concerning. So, no, I don't think that legislation is too soon. I'd say it's not soon enough for how many people have been using some of the really popular tools, not mentioning names. So, yeah, for me, it'll be a welcome thing. And it'll also be welcome for me as someone who makes AI and makes AI products and services, to know how I should be doing it with responsibility. How can I look after the consumers of that AI-driven product? So, yeah.
And Professor Caroline Jo, you talked about that we need to be thinking about it from, you know, what kind of society we want to live in, humanity. But what do you say to those who say that oftentimes technology essentially re-entrenches pre-existing social problems? I mean, one of the things that I saw on Instagram today, which was quite interesting, is that I think a Spanish company has developed an AI supermodel, and this supermodel is earning on $9,000 a month just after a few months, because loads of companies would just rather use this AI supermodel than real human models, because it's just cutting out all of the interaction and so on and so forth. So some people would say that they're powerless to shape society and influence these things. And when technology comes in, it only just further entrenches, you know, whatever economic, social, political system we have. So what's your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes agree with that. So I think that, okay, so it absolutely does that, right? This is a massive, massive problem. And I think disinformation is a really huge issue. So that's one area where I think, you know, the rot's already started to set in, and I mean, it's pretty significant. So I think it was the Argentinian election recently where, you know, there was basically a lot of the information about the election, about the candidates was propaganda. It was sort of automatically generated. Bias. Okay, so bias is an interesting one. So I think that absolutely we've seen really significant bias perpetuated. I also think that actually because, we have this magnifying effect of bias, right? AI sort of magnifies bias and shows it to people. Actually, that has been helpful in terms of making us see what some of the issues are with our society. So it can perpetuate bias, and so for example, where this I think is still happening, in things like selection tools, right? So recruitment, selection, and this kind of thing. And we know that a lot of these tools discriminate against women, for example, and we still see that happening for various reasons, and we're not quite sure why. So often we don't know why this happens, and so there are issues there. But on the other hand, I think we've gone, oh, okay. And I think you've just talked about this, haven't you, Saffron? Like when you see an issue, kind of an issue comes to the surface, and then so for example, with the medical scenario you talked about, it's exposed a problem. And so it's not just about fixing the technology, it's also going, well, why did that happen? Oh, it's because we're using data that we've created and that's biased, and maybe we should think about that. So I think that there are kind of positives there as well in terms of how we address things. But yeah, I mean, so this is definitely one of the ways in which I am pessimistic, I think, is that I think there's a lot of society is just going to, we're just going to have in the background, just hovering around, things like, we'll just get used to misinformation, we'll just get used to things being auto-generated, and people will be replaced with it. And we're seeing online a lot of auto-generated content, and at the moment we can kind of spot it, and I don't know, and then the LLMs get trained on the auto-generated content, and what are the implications of that? So everything might just become a bit worse. So it might not become absolutely terrible, it might just be a bit like, and we kind of lose that spark in some ways. So, yeah.
Okay, we're going to open up to the floor. There's lots of questions on Slido, so apologies beforehand if we're not able to go to everyone, but I think we'll take a few questions at a time and then open it to the panel to respond. So just first put your hands up if you have a question. Okay, so we'll take the woman in the red.
Hello, I'm not sure who to address this to, but I'm no more technical than your average layperson probably who has a computer at home. So, as I understand it, computer language is zeros and noughts. Zeros and ones. And even though computers can create novels, art and music now, this ability is based on algorithms, which in turn are originally based in human thought. So with AI, how are the eureka moments going to happen in future?
That's a really good question. I think that links to another question that someone's put in the Slido. Do you believe AI can be truly creative? I'll read another question from Slido, then take another one from the floor. What do you consider to be the solution to the rapid advancement in AI and how regulation keeps up? We know regulation is incredibly slow, so we've kind of touched upon that as well.
You talked about democratizing AI and democracy, but isn't part of the problem that we don't really have any control over it? For example, in China, they've already started looking at potentially using AI to plan their economy. People are having deep fakes made of them. Isn't the problem that if that happens, then we have no control over it and we can't kind of put that back in the bottle?
And another question from Slido, what tips would you give to bridge the digital divide in technology access as AI acceleration continues? Tamanda, do you want to start?
It's on. Marvellous. Okay, I'm not going to... Is it on?
Yeah.
No. Is it on now? Yes. Okay. Obviously, I'm not going to answer all of these, and I'll leave the more technical ones perhaps to the more technical people. I think the creativity and how the eureka moment's going to happen thing is a really interesting question. I know there are people who claim that a computer can be creative. There's a guy called Jürgen Schmidhuber who is as wonderful as his name suggests, but he's a real grandfather of machine learning, going back decades, and he claims that actually a machine can be creative because you can train a program to look for surprise, and that's basically what we're doing when we're being creative. Is we're kind of seeking something that surprises us, and that's what creativity is. But I think that springs from a very narrow idea of what human creativity is. And I see this a lot, that people who say, oh no, a computer can do anything a human can do. When you say, well, so what do you think a human can do? Their idea of how we think is quite limited. Jeff Hinton, who was one of the people who earlier in the year said, oh, we've really got to watch out because these computers are going to shortly be more intelligent than us and take over. And I saw him speak at a conference, and somebody said to him, so, but you've been describing computer thought as just vectors, but what do you think human thought is then? And he said, it's vectors all the way down. And I don't think that human thought is just vectors all the way down. I think there's more going on than that, because there's stuff going on lots of levels. We can do mathematical reasoning, we can take in lots of information and infer things, but we can have emotions, we can have commitments, we can have relationships, we can have a sense of our purpose in life, even if we have to go and find that purpose ourselves. We can change in response to what we do. So we can give ourselves a goal in life and then set out for it, and then on the way find that actually maybe not only is that not our goal, but maybe we have changed as people. And machines can't do any of those things as far as I can see. So that's why I think machines can't be truly creative. Having said that, especially things like generative, things like large language models, I think are capable of serendipity because of the random thing that's built into them, and that can be part of a human creative process. So in the same way that you might get stuck while writing something and go, all right, well, I'm gonna go for a walk, and the first thing I see, I'm gonna write about that, and that will just spark something new in me. If you wanted to work with a computer program that would produce things that you wouldn't produce, you can use that creatively. So I think the eureka moments will still come in the human recognizing something maybe that a computer has done and gone, yes, that's it, there's something there. So you can have it together, but I don't think the computers on their own are going to do that.
This is a really loaded question on creativity and eureka moments. I think you could spend a long time on it at a lot of levels. I think that you have to, there's a lot of places to start here. I mean, one place is like, what is creativity? And you have to define that first before you can define whether a computer can be truly creative. And if you're defining creativity as a property of human agency, then kind of fundamentally it can't be. If you're defining it more as coming up with something that is novel and not seen before, that's just really slippery to figure out. And so I don't know, I find this question really difficult and weird. I do think that, AI can help with humans creating new things. I mean, like, it can help us with scientific breakthroughs, it can help us kind of create art. I think, I don't know, lots of people have kind of spilled a lot of ink on this question, so I won't go into it more, but it's debated. On the authoritarian point and on democracy, yeah, I think that's one of the scarier things. If I'm passing your question correctly, kind of part of the problem is that in non-democratic places, it is really hard for anyone except the state to kind of decide how AI is used. And I don't really have anything super smart to say about that, because that's true and it's pretty scary. And I think, yeah, there's not much people can do except try to raise awareness of that. Yeah, I actually don't really have anything else to say. But
So I think when we think about sort of creativity and stuff like that, in a way, it's a false dichotomy, right, thinking about humans and machines, because actually they're tools that we use, you know, and I think, you know, again, panelists have said this, and so I think, and also we should reflect, creativity is a really interesting one, because when we think about art, okay, so a lot of this is in the eye of the beholder. So do you think that something a machine's created is interesting or not? Well, I think that's up to you, so that's part of it. But I also think, right, there are lots of artists who don't create their own work. They come up with the ideas, but they don't execute them. Are they being creative or not? Don't know. I mean, you know, open to debate, really. So I think, you know, and in a way, AI, you know, is kind of a tool, I think, from that perspective. So I think that's sort of where I am with that. In terms of misuse and lack of power, yeah, I mean, I totally agree. The thing that worries me most is where the power sits. And actually, in a way, I do worry about state actors, okay? I think we should definitely have concerns about that. You know, but I think, so within let's think about within the UK, okay? So let's think about that. I think where we don't believe, you know, we're in perhaps in more democratic areas and so on, I still think we've got a major issue, which is that a lot of the power is being granted to the technology companies. Oh, well, we don't want to stifle innovation. Well, sure. I mean, I understand the argument in the sense that someone's going to do it. This is true, right? And I accept that. But it's sort of, you know, I think this is where part of the issue lies. I think there is where there's money, there is power. And there's an awful lot of money in AI at the moment, and it's held by a few. And so, don't know what the answer is. But I think that's the thing that really concerns me, and that's one of the things I think we're kind of going, oh, we don't want to stop people. Well, I think actually we sort of know what we want at some level, so we just need to start putting in place some controls, and we will do that because things will get out of control, and then we'll have to grow on. Then it'll take ages, but you know, I'm glad I'm not a lawyer though at this point.
Quickly, because I actually have a question that I wanted to ask everyone, including.
Okay, I actually thought of something I wanted to say about creativity, which I forgot in the moment. So I think it's interesting because people say that large language models and kind of image models can't be creative because they're trained on human data. And so they're just regurgitating what their training data is. But I think that does misunderstand how these models work, because they map this data to their own kind of representation space. And then you can ask, say, ChatGPT for something like, can you give me a story about getting a peanut butter and jelly sandwich stuck in a VCR in the style of the King James Bible? And this is a thing that I saw on the internet. Like literally this, you should look it up. It's really funny. And it's like, this is kind of interpolation, right? Like it's taking some representations in its kind of like vector space, and you're saying, okay, now give me this thing that's like in the middle of like these other things. And yes, that is some kind of composite of existing data, but is it creativity? Like is interpolation creativity? And so I think there's some sense in which it's like, yeah, it's trained on a lot of data, that means it can't ever be original. Like, I don't think that quite is right, basically.
Did you want to respond to
just quickly. So I just want to touch on your Eureka moment one, and then I want to touch on your one as well about the digital divide. So in terms of the Eureka moment, we've had a lot of good perspectives here. I just want to give you my perspective in my role. So my job is to create AI-driven features for the vehicle, and hopefully some of those features are going to be never done before. And some of the ones that we're working on today are undergoing protection. So, you know, indeed it's true, we are looking for groundbreaking features that no one's done before, that's going to make someone say, you know what, I don't want that car anymore, I want a Jaguar, or I want a Range Rover. And that's me, by the way. I feel really dubious about training a machine to be able to do that, because I just want to touch on your point about the value of the human side. I don't think my job's going to be replaced. I think there's so much value in getting people together, brainstorming ideas. I'm thinking about ideas probably in my sleep, and I hope that there's some value in that, in bringing solutions to the table. I just don't think even the cleverest AI can do. So for me, that is what a unique moment is. That's what pays my bills. No, an AI system cannot and will never do it. So hopefully I've answered that question. And just coming to your point now about the digital divide and democratizing AI, yes, I think AI does need to be more democratized. But I would definitely like to see more happening in the legislation space. So we've seen it done with data really well, and it's something that we adhere to all the time whenever we're building an AI product. So if we've seen it done well with data, we can also see it done well with data science, which is just, the practical implementation of AI. That's what I would like to see before, the continued democratizing, I can't say that word, of AI. Yeah.
I have a question. What do you all make of existential risk and extreme risk? You've got people like Sam Altman and Elon Musk that say that they're genuinely worried about AI completely destroying the world. What do you make of that? Saffron?
Well, since I pitched up. I'm not worried about existential risk because I think it's a projection. And I think we do this a lot with AI. We project onto AI whatever our preoccupations are. So if we think that Sam Altman, when he talks about AI, he says it's going to give us superpowers. It's going to give everyone superpowers. And so you can see that's his preoccupation, is that he wants every individual human to have superpowers, and the AI is going to do that. People, on the other hand, that think that humans are awful and probably wrecking the planet, they imagine an AI that's going to become intelligent and then go, look, these humans are wrecking the planet, I shall wipe them out. And there's almost like a kind of God-shaped hole, and then people are building AI to fill it, and whatever they imagine, they're projecting onto the AI. I don't think we're anything near that. If one of you three wants to say, no, actually, we're only 5 years from super intelligent AI, I'll stand corrected. But I think the risk about that is that while we're all busy talking about, we should legislate against a super intelligent AI wiping us out, actually, a lot of the problems that we've already talked about are already here. The problems of trying to use AI for the ease of spreading false information, which I think false information is a problem that doesn't come from technology, but the technology spreads it more easily, and people losing their jobs potentially, and that there not being enough economic growth to give them new jobs, and algorithms that discriminate against people. Those are all already here. And especially when the big tech companies go out and say, you must regulate us, otherwise we may be building an AI that will destroy the world, they're like shifting the conversation over here and away from, maybe your algorithms should be subject to a bit more oversight, since they're making decisions about mortgages and whether people go to jail and things like that.
I've known about existential risk for a long time, and always felt pretty unsure about it. I think, whoa, death is scary, I guess. Extinction is scary. It's really easy, I think, for a certain kind of, especially mathematical brain to kind of follow these less wrong arguments on this forum and be like, wow, that's 50,000 steps of reasoning later, death, bad. I think there's it says a lot about, I think, the kind of reasoning that appeals to certain kinds of people. And I can see the appeal. And I think that what it misses a lot is much more rigorous analysis and thinking about social context and how humans behave and psychology and all these things that are less quantifiable and more fuzzy, and I think it just, more reflects the people, I think, as you said, Tamandra. And I think it's really hard to argue with, I've really tried, it's really hard to argue with people who are like, there is a really tiny risk, like a really, really tiny risk of something, but that something is so bad that we should put all of our resources into solving for that something because the numbers multiply out, and it's just like really difficult actually. So I think it's just this kind of like internally coherent worldview that like is a whole kind of like somewhat self-consistent paradigm, and so it's just difficult, I think, to pierce through. But I am working at the AI Safety Institute in the UK, which is like has a lot of these sorts of reasoning that premises it, and so I'm sort of trying to figure out like how to cohere a different worldview that is like internally acceptable. So yeah, working on it, but.
So I think when we think about, existential risk, it's interesting. So we've already got technology that we can use to destroy all of humanity, right? And we've got different types of that. We've got, different varieties. So we could use atomic bombs if that's what we wanted to do. And we don't do that mostly so far. It happens rarely. So we choose not to use those because we're aware of what they could do. But we do continue to use fossil fuels. And I think the AI risk is much more like the second one, in the sense that, and you've just said this, Tamandra, it's about lots of the stuff we know about already, the potential problems it causes, and then of course there will probably be a lot of other problems that we don't know about yet. And it won't be to do with the AI becoming so intelligent it takes over necessarily. That is potentially possible, but low probability. So that's not really the highest risk. There are many other risks that I think are more significant, and we don't necessarily know what they are, and that's the reason they're a problem, because we haven't spotted them yet, and we haven't spotted the outcomes yet. And so that's more of an issue. So yeah, it is a distraction talking about, I don't know what it looks like, but something that's so intelligent it decides to destroy humanity or terminate robots or whatever you want to think about. I think humans are really bad at predicting the future, and we also don't worry about the right things sometimes.
Thanks. And then, just very briefly from me, I don't think there's like a blanket risk from AI, but I just want to go back to some of the points I mentioned in my talk. I do think, and I do sympathise with risk to groups of people, and the displacement of jobs and them not getting other jobs in return. And I heard something wild about some kind of currency or benefit being made or thought about in preparation for that time. So, I do sympathise with that side of things. I don't think there's a blanket risk though from AI, and I kind of think that when you do have these big names talking about it, some of it is just hype and some of it is to make themselves look cooler and to also sell their products and their platforms, X and, stuff like that. So I would take it with a pinch of salt. If you heard how I described what generative AI is, and when people talk about AI now, often they're talking about Gen AI, it's not that different to traditional AI. So it's a lot more data. If it seems creative and if it seems it can think on its own, it's been allowed to have some element of randomness. So do I feel scared about that? No. And if the big names tell you to be scared about it, try not to be. You like someone else said, you're on the privileged side of things. So yeah, that's my response.
Thank you. We've got quite a few questions from Slido. There's been quite a lot of questions on privacy, and in the future, will we have any privacy over our data at all? Another question on what concerns or things should we be thinking about in relation to upcoming elections. I think people have touched upon deep fakes and so on. I think that's something that people have talked about. There's also a question on what the input from the humanities and social sciences should be in this conversation, because obviously there's been a lot around technology. Is there questions from the floor? You over here?
I guess I'm in the optimistic but confused box with this. It just seems to me that all the uses that people are making of AI are very high tech, and it feels like, you know, we should be using it to do some of the things we actually can't do, like pick fruit. You know, to things that would really tackle some of the social issues we've got now, rather than worrying about social issues that might happen in the future. But that, you know, to me, that seems like more like machine learning than AI. And I think the language we use in all this is really important. I think when we talk about Siri listening, she's not listening. You know, when you talk about machines thinking, they're not thinking.
I agree.
And I do think, you know, to some extent, if we want to have regulation, it should be around stopping us being like anthropomorphic. I don't know if that's the right word in this context, but, you know, we should stop imputing human characteristics to machines. I think that's the thing that's really confusing us. So, you know, why are we not making much more use of this in areas where we could, you know, move forward really quickly, rather than making tiny changes, you know, in terms of, you know, how your seat is adjusted in your car.
I think I better take that question. I think your fruit picking example, I don't know if I'd say AI could help. I'd say robotics could help. So when you say using language carefully, I would agree. I think because there's so many question marks about the landscape of AI and regulation and the risk as well, and it not being fully defined yet, it kind of holds people back in terms of how far they can go with the development. So also, you know, consumers themselves, they're still on that journey in terms of learning AI. So if it was something, I did an event earlier today and I was talking about the Face ID on the phone. And for me, it's just, while I'm on that journey, it's the simpler things which make a difference to my life. So I wouldn't trivialize that. And I would just kind of take into the equation how far things have come in such a short space of time. And there's a lot to do from the regulatory point of view as well. So yeah, that's my response there.
I think, yeah, I don't like the term AI, but I think especially in recent years it's been revitalized, and machine learning is more precise. And I think in terms of robotics, like there's a lot of machine learning in robotics. There's a lot of overlap. And I do think robotics in a lot of aspects, pushing that forward would be amazing, but robotics is really difficult. Like the physical world is really difficult. Making a fruit picking robot is not easy. And what is easier comparatively is like, look, we have all this data on the internet. Like we have so much information. Wow, like it's just lying there. Not, I mean, copyright, but like it's kind of there. Like let's use that and let's continue to make money off ads and kind of social media and entertainment. Like, you know, I think, what's that book? It's called like Amusing Ourselves to Death. Like I think it's interesting because so much investment and so much money goes into entertainment instead of other kinds of applications that would improve people's lives. I mean, not that entertainment doesn't, but I think there are a lot of questions to ask around where are our like R&D resources going into, and how is that driven by factors like kind of ease of profitability in certain areas, or kind of like questions that are just easier to pick off than other kinds of questions.
Did anyone want to pick up on the other questions that were?
So privacy is a really interesting one. I think that, so as somebody who works in technology, and I talk about this to my daughters as well, so essentially I treat anything, this is going to sound paranoid now, anything I write down on my phone or on a computer, I write it as if someone else might read it. Right, that's how I live now. Because even though most of the time that won't happen, by the way, just to reassure you, that probably won't happen. Certainly if it's on the internet, right, for sure, someone will read it, that's why it's there. But, you know, there are lots of, you know, when you post something on social media, you expect only certain people are going to read it, but actually, you know, that's a bit of a grey area in terms of how it's used by technology and so on, and there'll be, you know, lots of other ways in which it might be accessed, not necessarily read by another person. And so I think that's interesting because it sort of does change the way we live. And my perspective on privacy is that, so medical data is a really interesting one. There are sort of two sides to it. So if medical data is in the right hands, then it's absolutely a good thing for us to share our data so that we can improve, lots of aspects of our health. And in fact, we have a crisis in the healthcare system, and actually AI, in inverted commas, is one of the things that might offer us some way out of that, right? So technology is going to help us with some of those situations. We don't have time to go into all of the ways in which it might, but I think that's positive. But obviously, the minute people start to know about somebody's medical conditions, that has lots of other implications. If it's your employer, if it's your health insurance, these kinds of things, and that can be potentially disastrous. So yeah, so I think we all just sort of have to get used to the fact that a lot of data is going to be shared, and I think there's no going back from that. And so it's going to be about regulation again. It's not whether the data is available or whether someone could do something useful with it. It's like, are they allowed to? That's really important. And you said, and it's true. I mean, in this country, we do have quite a lot of good data protection laws already. But yeah, I think if we want the benefits, and most of us do, because we use these, we'll all use some of these systems in this room, then you have to accept that you're going to be sharing your data in order to get those benefits.
I wanted to jump in quickly on that. So there's this kind of budding field of research on privacy-preserving machine learning, and it's fairly new. But if people here are interested in it, one of my ex-colleagues at DeepMind runs a nonprofit called OpenMind, and their tagline or their kind of mission is kind of unlocking access to thousands more data, because the idea is, what if we could get the benefit of the aggregated insights from data without actually seeing the individual rows, like the individual patients, their individual information, but like getting the aggregate statistics out. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. There are some kind of keywords I'll throw out, like zero knowledge proofs. Like zero knowledge proofs are really interesting because they only give you like the specific fact that you're trying to kind of prove, and they don't give you they don't leak any other information. So yeah, I think like I'm really excited about that, and kind of advancing that so that we can try and strike a compromise.
And I wanted to come on, I agree with all the privacy stuff. The only thing I'd add is that the reason we lack privacy through our data is that we've forgotten why privacy is important. That we had already forgotten why we should have an area in which we decide who learns what we say and what we think, and that we should have the right to have private conversations where we work out what we think before we go out into the public arena. So because we didn't know what we were arguing from, so we weren't able to argue that actually this stuff is private. But what I really wanted to talk about was the elections. That was because this is something that I was very bothered. Darlings, I was bothered about campaigning, automated, personalised political campaigning before it was fashionable. Before Cambridge Analytica came along, I was writing saying, look, politics has turned into a kind of automated, targeted marketing exercise where politicians just personalise a message to you, what they think you're bothered about, they're going to persuade you, and then with you, they target you with a different message. And I don't think this is a good thing for politics, precisely because politics should be something that we have out in public, where politicians are accountable and have to make an argument for all of us. And then Cambridge Analytica came along, and I was like, well, hello, what was I saying? But then actually, when I looked into it, it was very overblown. And a lot of people who were on the inside went, yeah, well, it wasn't actually, they sold it because they were trying to sell a product, but they can't actually manipulate people in anything like as good as the way they say. And I went and tried some of there is a department at Cambridge called the Cambridge Psychometric Centre where a researcher did the initial research, and then he took the research away, and Cambridge Analytica used it and so on. And it's just, it can't read your mind, actually. I tested their their program. It said, let us loose on your social media and we'll see what you like. So I let it loose on my Twitter, and apparently I'm a 30-year-old man. So that's why I get all the beard care products advertised to me. So it's not anything like as effective as they pretend. So I don't worry on that front about, oh no, they're all going to manipulate our minds using machine-generated, automated messaging that's targeted to each of us. I just don't think it's that effective. But I am worried about the underlying shift, which is that instead of politics being an exercise in public reason where we have arguments about principles, it's just another targeted marketing thing, like selling beard care products to people that Twitter thinks are men. So on the one hand, don't worry about it, but on the other hand, do worry about it, but not for those reasons. This is probably the time to mention my next book is called Technology is Not the Problem, because almost all of these things are like, yeah, but it's actually technology is not the problem. We need to take it back to, why is it that we really care about getting into a car and the car recognizes that it's us and we go, yeah, see, I'm really special and unique. Even my car thinks so. Thank you very much. Which is exactly the same principle as why we feel we should get individual personalised political messages. Please buy my next book, thank you.
Well, on that note, can we have a round of applause for our fantastic